History shapes everything we do and everything we believe. Across the centuries, a few have written the stories of humanity, and in doing so, have silenced countless others. Choke Points Through Time is where those voices are heard again. Join Dr. Wayne Sedlak, linguist, scholar of ancient languages and history, pastor, former missionary to Africa, graduate school dean, and professor, as he opens the door to our forgotten past. From the tablets of lost civilizations to the chronicles of empires long fallen, discover the truths history tried to hide and the forces that still shape our world today. Choke Points Through Time, a journey through the pivotal moments of mankind's story. This is history as you've never heard it before. And now, here is Dr. Wayne Sedlak.
John Maynard Keynes, considered the greatest economist to have lived in the 20th century, joins our Hall of Infamy for the authors who have written books that transformed the world but should never have written them. He wrote the book, His General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. I'm not going to bore you with reading its contents, and in fact, there are many that read it and they can't understand it. He, in my estimation, deliberately obscured potential weaknesses in his theory, made it tough to figure out what he's actually saying. In fact, he's famous for his, on the one hand, criticism of inflation, where he said, inflation could never be effective in curing deep recessions. And I agree with that. But on the other hand, it's always this, on the one hand, but then not so fast. Because you see, he was the biggest advocate of governments using inflation, using debt, runaway debt, running deficit. He's the master. He's the father of deficit spending and redistribution of wealth. To get there, they need inflation. But he knew in his day that most people didn't understand inflation and what caused it. Most people simply saw it as, the result of, and you hear various things. In fact, I remember as a kid hearing these things. In my high school class, went to a secular high school, heard the same thing, all this Keynesian stuff. The real cause of inflation is the free enterprise system. Too much speculation. There's that word, speculation. Makes it sound evil, doesn't it? They're out there gambling with your life. They make money and they rake it in while you and I are suffering. That's the idea of a speculator. And of course, speculators, they invest in stocks and bonds and commodities and currencies. Real estate, they drive prices up. So inflation was defined as rising prices. His definition of inflation is like saying that wet sidewalks defines rain. Well, no, it's not its definition, it's a result. Rising price, of course, characterizes inflation, but that's not its cause. It's not speculators. It's not unions. I heard that too. And protests and, strikes that drive prices up, people bargaining for more money. All kinds of theories as to what drove inflation up. Over the years, people started to figure it out, especially with the works of economists like Hans Sennholz, F.A. Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, and there are others, Murray Rothbard. But back to Keynes. I'm not going to bore you with his treatise. I agree with his assessment, and I see it as interesting for a man to write this. When it comes to inflation, not one person in a million can discern it. Well, Mr. Keynes, teach us. Because you wrote a tome of a work. It's huge, hundreds of pages. And you did nothing more than obfuscate. All you did was make things more obscure, as so many who have tried to read his general theory have shown. I've long since learned that when somebody has a great impact and they've written about it, there's one of two things. Either they're confused or they are geniuses. You can tell the difference. But a malevolent genius, someone who knows where his opponents are going to pick him apart, foresees that potential and disguises it. Now, the Bible speaks of a wise man seeing an impending problem and hiding himself. Well, the Bible also teaches us that we're in a culture war worldwide of Chokmah versus Chokmah. Chokmah is wisdom and describes the man who's cunning, evil, shrewd, serpentine. Jesus described that when he said, "Be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves." Note the emphasis on wisdom. They can be wise, all right. It's not a wisdom that's from above, as James speaks of. That's a different kind of wisdom. That's a characterological wisdom. It's also intellectual, because character and intellect go hand in hand. You can't separate your brain, your mind, your thinking. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. You can't separate those two. Character and thinking go hand in glove. But there's a wisdom that's a gift from on high. God gave it, for example, to Solomon and to David, by the way. The Psalms tell us that. Back to Mr. Keynes. As I said, he joins that hall of infamy that we've created here, of those who authored works that changed the world, and they should never have taken pen in hand. We saw that with Mr. Darwin. His Origin of the Species was designed. It was a calculated malevolence, aimed at the Lord, aimed at Christianity, particularly the Victorian kind of Christianity. He was bitter toward God. Sir Flinders Petrie, his work, 70 Years in Archaeology. Actually, had several works. 70 Years in Archaeology, his foundational study, the pyramids and the temples of Giza. He rewrote what the pyramids were supposed to be at Giza. We now know what they were for. In fact, we've detailed that on this show. Yes, temples, but remember, the Sphinx, which is kind of the doorway to the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx was the head of an Egyptian woman, not a man, as people like Petrie and others detailed, and the body of a lion. And the temples at Esna and Dendera tell us it's the beginning and the end of the zodiac. Well, the beginning is a woman. The Romans called her Virgo. The ancients called her the Virgin, who would have a child. Does that sound like anything in our theology? Yeah, it goes back, not just to Isaiah, who announced it, but rather the antediluvian world. Josephus tells us that the antediluvian prophets, patriarchs, did much with astronomy. And of course, we see that in archaeology. The pyramid is a mountain, represents the earth. There's way too much mathematical comparisons that are spot on with measurements of the earth. And even though it's not a globe in structure, it's a mountain in structure that once was covered in gold, designed to be a light to the nations, torn off by sheer force of water. And the Sphinx is cut by salt water. So what covered these areas? Once a lush area. That whole area of North Africa was a lush civilization. Gone, buried beneath water. Salt water, in fact. We covered that. You see, men like Sir Flinders Petrie rewrote so as to not necessarily to directly attack the flood or creation, but rather to simply push them to the side. Why would you martyr something and just get people to ignore? Martyrs live after they're dead, meaning their testimony continues to sound out. They continue to have an impact. Well, why martyr? Why martyr the Victorian faith? Just ignore it. Rewrite it scientifically in areas that people don't know. In the future, we'll cover books that should have been written and were. Books that were written to contest some of these that we're talking about. So, in any event, back to John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes, Keynes, the economist of the 20th century. Considered the greatest economist, although he was answered by Hayek and von Mises, Sennholz. In fact, his theories are not really as acceptable as when he came on. He is an apt illustration of an economic principle found in the Bible. Money and character go hand in hand. Now, don't get me, this is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that because you're poor, you're bad in character, and if you're rich in character. It's nonsense. Neither one of those are necessarily true. They may be. Proverbs 6 says, if you're poor, it could be because of bad character. You're indolent. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Note, thou sluggard. But, and as far as the rich are concerned, the Bible does tell us it's difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. In fact, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. And that expression is very, very poignant. The eye of a needle was actually a passage for a caravan route. And you had to get through the eye of the needle. For a camel to get through, it was very, very tough. Jesus said it's easier to get the animal through there than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Anyway, again, John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes, a lover of young Tunisian boys. He's a pederast. I have long since detailed the fact that when you get perversities like pederism is perverse. It's criminal, in fact. That kind of perversity goes hand in glove with the distortion of mind and character and guilt. And the guilt gets suppressed, and an inner hatred for that which is upright develops. I see that in those who tragically are abused as children. They grow up guilty. Now, the ones that sinned against them, that's what I'm talking about here, abuse those young girls and even young boys. And they grow up and they want to get out of, even climb out of their skin, climb out of even their gender. I know I've talked with quite a few out in the streets, various parades that they hold. And it's a tragedy. Those that did that to them are the ones that sin against God and are the perverts. And the perversity tragically abuses the relationship of parents or siblings of siblings, or uncles toward, and in other words, adults toward children and family. So this lover of young Tunisian boys, he went to Tunisia, he and a friend. And he was open about this, by the way. He wrote journals on his sexual escapades. Keynes did. He openly spoke in detail. He kept journals of his sexual proclivities. Because of him, he would advocate more perversities. You see, he's the one that said he had some theories obviously, about economics. I'll give you the short of the long. It was he who believed there was a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. In other words, you couldn't have both of them at the same time. Well, the stagflation of the 70s and that which could loom in our future has long since, or the earlier one obviously disproved he was wrong. In other words, we've got both of them peaking at the same time. Both of them spiking, I should say, at the same time. The 70s, that really threw a wrench in the entire theory of Keynes, because Keynes believed that government deficits, and here's the perversity. The Bible speaks of savings, if you save, which is investing, by the way. Put your money, your savings to go to work for you, kind of like a servant. That servant builds something for you, except that this servant can work on Sundays as well. It can work on holidays because it's money going to work for you, for retirement, for example, to keep you out of debt, for example, as you build the life of your family. You see, Keynes saw your savings and that of people in his day as pulling money out of the economy that could have been used to stimulate jobs, and therefore, because it wasn't occurring, it was creating unemployment. So he suggested, no, he wrote, that government spend at a deficit. And spending those at a deficit debt money, fiat money, make up the gap between the employment that is and the employment that should be, by pulling money and taxing it out of you. But he saw also that the hidden tax, inflation, could redistribute the entire economy. In fact, inflation captures all the laws of economics on the side of destruction. He was actually quoting Lenin in his book, The Consequences of the Peace, referring to World War I. He quotes Vladimir Lenin, the founder of the Bolshevik Revolution. And Lenin cited the fact that if you want to destroy capitalism, a capitalistic government and nation like America, get it to inflate its currencies. Because inflation captures all the laws of economics. Note this, on the side of destruction. That's the crucial part of our analysis here. To capture all the laws of economics on the side of destruction. That's part of the money science. The downside, the terrible side of the money science. The side that destroys. There is the upside of the money science. Remember, economics is the study of the use of scarce resources which have alternative potential uses. So you study what's the best use you can put in good stewardship of the various alternatives you have in front of you for wealth and for money, for resources. The resources are scarce, so you have to choose wisely. The science of money is the strategic use of economic truth. How you use wealth, money, capital, and risk. And I would add time. Time, risk, in the Bible, and we'll comment to this in the future. In the Bible, time is life, blood is life, and money. In the Bible, money and blood are used as metaphors almost interchangeably, hence redemption. When Christ went to the cross to redeem, redemption is an economic term, buying you and I out of the slavery of Satan and unto eternal life and the richness of God's future kingdom. Redemption is an economic issue because in the Old Testament, a redeemer was one who paid a price to get someone dear to him out of that bondage. And Isaiah is one of those prophets that bridges the gap. So is St. Paul in the New Testament. They bridge the gap between the two, making redemption using financial language. You're bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body, as the New Testament says. Using redemptive financial, monetary, capital reasoning in terms, but applying to rich spiritual truths. For example, the Holy Spirit is called the earnest money of your inheritance. He's the down payment. That's what earnest money is, isn't it? It's upfront money. You're going to do this deal, like on a house. He's called the earnest money. King James didn't quite get that right. Because, of course, they suffered from a form of pietism, not piety. That means godly. Pietism that would say, oh, no, money's dirty. Except, of course, when they had it. But when it came to money terms like that, they tended to kind of move away from those metaphors and thereby obscured their use. A good man gets a wife who is a good wife, we're told in Proverbs, and she is worth more than rubies. I've heard men joke about that. Kind of kidding. Maybe their wives aren't that. Well, I'd rather have the rubies, that kind of joke. Ha ha ho ho. The Bible doesn't make it a joke. A man is redeemed by his helpmeet. And she enters into a relationship, they're one in that calling. The Bible uses many such economic terms. Well, John Maynard Keynes went to war with things like savings, because in the law of God, the Bible does teach us to be frugal, be good stewards, and to save. And by saving, it's not sticking it under a pillow. You don't stick the money under a pillow. You invest it so that you get a good return on your investment. Jesus used that. You recall, he had servants that were given money and they invested it and they got a return on investment. He praised them, and then one said, no, I hid this one. He said, thou wicked servant. God invests you. Well, Keynes didn't like the idea of savings, so he attacked it. And by doing so, he would gradually make a people poor by punishing them for their savings. This would lead to punishment on inheritance. Fewer and fewer can actually pass something down to their families, their children or grandchildren. A good man leaves an inheritance for his son's son, Bible tells us, his grandchildren. But he can't do that if it's taken from him. Keynes fashioned the monetary plan to do that, to gradually take it away. In fact, we call that redistribution of income. But it was more than that. In fact, it was a lot more than that. You see, people resist being stolen from, or just plain taken. And so he realized that what they're going to have to do, they, meaning those that follow his policies for government, they're going to have to do it in such a way that nobody understands it. That was the purpose of his general theory of employment, interest, and money. Yes, he was promoting it, but first of all, he made it about as boring as... That book is about as dry as Gideon's unwetted fleece. It's powerful, but you have to spend a lot of time digging into it, and frankly, you can get the synopsis. You're getting a synopsis here. I wouldn't waste the time. Because he understood the role of inflation. This was not a man who's ignorant. He quoted Lenin in another book, Consequence of the Peace, but the economic consequence of the peace. But he stated categorically that, inflation captures all the laws of economics on the side of destruction. So when he advocated for deficit spending, where are the government's going to get this? Well, he advocated fiat money, fiat, F-I-A-T, money that has no backing. And so the nations got off the gold standard. His theory attacked the whole idea of holding gold, and FDR took America off the gold standard. Nixon went along, and later on, he made it even worse. They even owned gold, except as a collector and under certain circumstances, jewelry. But gold, you have to understand the dynamic of an honest money in contrast to what we have. Keynes knew what he was attacking. It's not that the Bible says you must have gold as your money. The Bible says you have to have an honest medium of exchange, and it puts gold forward and silver as potential mediums of exchange, meaning they facilitate exchange. You can make it fair. They can be broken down into units like we do, dollars and quarters and dimes, and we do it further into other metals like it used to be copper and the penny. We don't even have that anymore. So our money is not even a commodity. It's not a commodity anymore. Those are technically money substitutes. If you read von Mises, they are not actual honest money. They are money substitutes. But we say they're money because that's the way we've been taught. And that's what Keynes called them. And so he knew that to get at your savings, according to his theory, to create employment, much more employment, you were the villain. He's blaming you who are frugal. When the wicked rule, the people mourn. It's a perversion called evil good and good evil. That's what he did. Note, I said before, economics and character, good or bad, go hand in hand. He's calling evil good and good evil. It's good to be in unbelievable debt, he said, because then you'll get better employment. Well, we've proven that wrong. You get a lot of inflation, though, because the supply of money, increasing that increases the inflationary rate, thereby raising prices. How do I know that? It's real simple. It shouldn't be a mystery. It's not speculators, and it's not unions, and it's not greed driving the economy. Again, we're calling evil good and good evil. Not necessarily saying that all those things I just enumerated are good or bad, but they're not the cause. Because somebody wants a raise doesn't increase inflation. They want to be paid for their time. They believe it's worth this, and so they want a raise. Now, if the employer doesn't want to give them one, well, that's his choice too. They shouldn't be forced to do so. And that brings up a whole other area of ethics. It's very easy to understand if you raise demand and you keep everything else constant for a moment. Just raise the demand for different goods. You get more people at an auction that want one thing there. Price is going to go up. Now, the instrument that's used to create or to feed demand is money. If you increase the supply of money, don't get lost in the word supply and demand here. If you increase the amount of money, let's say you go around the room at that auction, and everybody wants it. Before the auction started, everybody wants that thing. They want it badly. But a lot of them don't have enough money in their pockets. They're hoping that, maybe $100 will take care of it. Another one has got $300. No one's got 1,000. He's pretty confident. You go around the room, or somebody goes around the room and stuffs their wallets with several thousand. What do you think's going to happen to the price? if they all want it. Well, that thing's going to shoot to the moon. If you increase the amount of money, which feeds demand, price will go up. Economists say the price will go up, ceteris paribus. Leaving all other variables for a moment constant, we can see the principle. Keynes attacked the very concept of an honest money, fiat money. He attacked savings. He called evil good and good evil. When you're frugal, when you're saving for your family and for the future, he said, no, you're bloody. You're causing someone else not to have a job. The Marxists simply took Keynes another step and they said, you're exploiting. Your wealth shows that somebody else is without what they need. You're greedy. You exploited them, especially if you used their labor and you paid them pennies and you made all the wealth. Now, I don't doubt the fact that there are rotten to the core employers. Equally, there are rotten to the core workers, because the issue has nothing to do with economics. It has everything to do with man's sinful and fallen nature. Start there, and then see how his or her character is played out as they seek money. An honest man, there's certain things he's not going to do. An honest woman, certain things she's not going to do. Somebody who's upright in character, there's things they're not going to do for money. A good woman's not going to prostitute herself for money. She's going to earn. She will seek to be married, for example, and be a good housewife, a good mom. And a good housewife, a good mom, is, as Scripture says, worth rubies, to the point where a man will not need to be a thief, who have no need of spoil. You see good character being played on. Look at the woman of Proverbs 31. I've heard lots of people talk about, a lot of women over the years in churches. And they're men folk talking about how they have Bible studies on Proverbs 31. They always talk about the devotional end. That woman's like they didn't read the chapter. That chapter's all about a good woman's use of money. It's all about that. And the wealth that she procured using money. In fact, one of the central themes of that gets one verse. She worked hard to keep her husband, David, because this is Bathsheba. You don't hear that anymore, not in modern commentaries. They hate that so much, they even have invented an unnamed Arab sheik who had this woman in his harem. That's how foolish these interpreters get. They run from the obvious. The Hebrew is very clear. The English can bring it out. That was Bathsheba, a repentant woman. And she worked hard to keep her husband, who was not paid as a king. Now, there was a largesse that he could access. God said so. But he had to stay in the gates to keep justice in the land. He was also a good businessman. But he had a great businesswoman as his wife. She built 3 businesses. She built merchandise. She saw that her merchandise was good. Note that she wasn't cheating anybody. Much of that was clothing. Linens. To get linens, you have to have a flax field. You have to have it. Now, you could buy the flax, I'm sure, but it appears that she had the flax to produce the garments. And she had servants to do with this, as she did. She worked with her servants. She certainly had a vineyard. She took the proceeds of what she had earned in her merchandising. She sold her goods. She raised flax. Linens were produced from it. And she took that and reinvested it in a vineyard. This woman knew how to invest. The vineyard, of course, would represent wine, the wine that would be a good wine. Obviously, she succeeded. People don't praise a fool, don't praise a failure, and it may not be her fault. She's no fool, and she was no failure. Because later on, the elders praised her in the gate, the elders throughout the entire land. She was very successful in matters of charity, in matters of the political. You see that in 1 Kings. She defended David's throne, and defended Solomon's right to it, because God said so with Solomon. And Solomon became in part her reward. And Solomon learned his economics from this brilliant woman. I can't wait to meet Bathsheba in heaven. The first things I'm going to ask her is, where did you learn it all, economically? The woman is just plain outright brilliant. When you study the Hebrew, it gets even more graphic. And then when you cross-reference it with her biographical sketch that you find in Chronicles and Kings, and Samuel and David in those same areas, and then you start to compare some of the Psalms, the way David taught his family to pray. Read it carefully. He's teaching his family to pray. You start doing that comparison, you've got one lovely woman. And Solomon learned from her. Good character begat great economics. Well, not as far as Keynes was concerned. You see, perverse character like Keynes, they call evil good and good evil. So what are we seeing with Mr. Keynes? Runaway inflation. Stagflation, which means unemployment and inflation spike at the same time, something that economists for centuries thought could not occur. Well, using Keynesian economics, he got the impossible to occur. Technically not impossible, but let's just say he fed two cancers the same sugar. And so he brought about more and more booms and busts here in economics classes all throughout the country. You find students are perverted by the claim that the free market produces these wild roller coasters. It takes off, and then it collapses into a depression or a recession or a panic, whichever word they're using to describe the same thing. By the way, those are the same. We used to call it a panic in this country, then it became a depression. Nobody liked the term because of the Great Depression. So now they take the edge up by using recession. So this roller coaster ride, because there's all this greed drives the price up, they say. Prices go up, then of course things come crashing down because that's what the way free enterprise works. No, it does not. You can correlate the roller coaster ride with the government central bank increases in the money supply. Dr. Hans Sennholz, in fact, demonstrated that in his brilliant work, The Great Depression. Dr. Murray Rothbard, Dr. Ludwig von Mises, these men demonstrated that it was the Fed, the central bank, and in every nation where there's a central bank that does it, you'll find the money getting inflation makes the value of an individual unit of money less and less, meaning it purchases less. So the same dollar when I was a kid, I could go up to the store and I could stuff myself from penny candy. Well, that dollar, in many cases, won't even buy me a candy bar right now. Bread, when I was a kid, was 25 cents a loaf, or thereabouts, if I remember correctly. Now, was it the most nutritional bread? Okay, thank you. That's not where I'm going. But the same bread is $3, $4, and $5 a loaf. Now you might say, oh, it's better bread. Okay, fine, great. But you're not going to get bread for 25 cents a loaf or half a buck. You're not going to get it. Everything has gone up. So what that does, it redistributes income. The few, and here's another consequence of Mr. Keynes. He recognized this. He said it. When you do this deficit spending, there will be a few at the top of the economic tree who glean gobs of money. They'll become the billionaires. Millionaires become billionaires. The rest of us, the inflation eats out our substance like a cancer over time. So the vast majority of working people lose purchasing power, lose their homes in due time. Their savings are gone. The Bible teaches us that when you're frugal, when you're saving, you can set that off against future problems, maybe medical bills in our terms, certain needs, educational needs. Many people today do not have an educational fund for future college. Some do, but when I was growing up, that was common. People can't afford it. So runaway inflation, deficit spending, and you have a few at the top that make a lot of money. Why do you think people want to get into government? He also knew that this increased the propensity toward corruption in government because now you've got a government milk machine. All you do is get elected, and now you can draw on the substance of other people's money, namely the people in the economy, the hard workers. And so it becomes tax and spend. It becomes the hidden tax, inflation, that eats out the substance like a cancer. Savings are depleted. Inheritance is terribly damaged or doesn't exist. Nothing to pass down. People lose their homes. Corruption becomes rampant. An oligarchy of money forms at the top. The vast majority are living from hand to mouth monthly. Too many bills for too little income in a month. And at times their government comes crashing down on them as if they haven't done enough. Many decide, instead of going off and finding a way in an economy that's fraught with obstacles and building a business, they just go into the military. By the way, that's a planned science of money result. Most people look at the economy and they say, I don't know what to do with this. If I risk my pennies here, the chance that I will have a success in a business, unlike that of, say, 50 years ago, you can get into business and you can begin to do well. Everybody that gets into business starts off, invariably they start off having to take a bit of a licking until they can get to the point where they themselves are taken care of by the same business. But it takes a while. Today, it's a huge risk. So many either go for unskilled labor. Schools aren't teaching them to be entrepreneurs anymore. They used to. They become unskilled workers, living hand to mouth, if they go in the military. Of course, the military offers all sorts of benefits. There is one decided liability. The obvious one, you can get killed. And when you have all this runaway inflation and the costs are going up, at some point, the government must step in to limit population. Too many mouths to feed in the economy. That's how people get angry and they take to the streets and riots ensue. So you make abortion legal and euthanasia those that are weak in their elderly years. They're not, it is said they're not contributing to the well-being. They're consumers only. They're not adding now to the wealth of society. They're consumptive. And so euthanasia becomes an option. And there are states that allow you to do that. Countries around the world let you do that. You see, the point is, Keynes' economic miracle was a disaster. We've had more recessions, deeper recessions, but more frequent recessions since his views came out advocating all this. Not only were there more of them under the guise of trying to rectify the unemployment situation like in the Depression. His book was written in 1936 at the height of the Great Depression, so he's writing about unemployment, so people said, well, this looks like a great idea. The free market failed, so therefore we need something new. That was the propaganda that Keynes and FDR helped engineer, and others with them. And so, with that, they created a monster. A society now that, and here's the catch, one other Keynesian faux pas, F.A. Hayek, and again others that followed, but prove that government-sponsored inflation begins to take off. You will need more government to control the runaway train. So if inflation is a runaway train, you're going to need more and more engineers, more ways to slow it down, more ways to control it, maybe more track, maybe, to press the analogy, more cars going over here and others going over there so that the resultant crash isn't as bad. However we press the metaphor, when government sponsors inflation, and it is governments that do it, they guarantee more government is needed because inflation creates economic and societal chaos. A man is known by his fruits. Probably the least offensive thing Mr. Keynes did was hunt down young Tunisian boys. I hate to say that. The terrible tragedy there, it was one at a time. And most, if not all of them, lived. Talk about it. With the stroke of his pen, he created a monster of a book that reeked of bloodshed in the lives of now billions of people, as governments around the world have adopted his theories. Perverse in character over here, sexually, perverse in thinking over there, perverse in economics, the way wealth he believes should be managed, resulting in a perversity, a mountain of perversity in our society. A reminder, in September, beginning September 8th and September 10th, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we'll be studying the science of money, economics and the science of money. The good side to both, and you'll learn the bad side. The side that creates confusion and false expertise, as well as the side that God's Word endorses for building good stewardship, soundness in thinking, like the woman of Proverbs 31 and her husband, David. May God bless you.
This has been Choke Points Through Time with Dr. Wayne Sedlak. Visit us at visionviewpoint.com, where you'll find a host of articles, books, and videos designed to answer any questions you may have. Join us Tuesdays and Fridays for Choke Points Through Time with Dr. Wayne Sedlak.